The
Start.
broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, Nick from ICA is on. I'll just do, everyone just hold off for a second, and then I'll just do attendance in a minute or two, make sure everyone's on. Then we'll have Bobby start up. Hey everyone, I'm just going to do, this is Nick from ICA. Thanks for jumping on the TA call today. We're just going to run around and do a quick attendance check off for everyone who's in, and then I'll just do a brief introduction from Bobby from MyCNA Jobs, and then he'll take over the rest of the call. So if people are on, just do a quick intro, your name and organization. Oh, is everyone muted still?
This is Lindsay and Kippy from Peninsula Home Care Cooperative.
Hi guys.
Morning.
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 Georgia Allen with Soaring Independent Cooperative.
I see some of you are signing in on the comments. That's fine too. Okay, great. So we have a full presentation today. So we're going to go ahead and start the presentation. We're lucky today to have Bobby Morelli from MyCNA Jobs, who's going to talk about recruitment and retention in the home care industry. He's going to talk for about 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll have 5 to 10 minutes at the end for questions. So at that, I'll give it over to Bobby. Go ahead.
Perfect, Nick. Thank you. And thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to spending the next, like Nick said, 45, 50 minutes with you folks, really digging into some of the caregiver trends we're seeing and arming you with some information you can take back to your local markets and really implement some things to hopefully get those caregivers hired that we're all looking for. Again, my name is Bobby Morelli. I'm one of the VPs over here at MyCNA Jobs. And kind of as we go through the discussion today, I'd like to table those questions until the end. So hopefully I answer some of those along the way. I'm going to have quite a bit of information for you today. So I'd suggest if you don't already have a paper and pen ready. There's some opportunities to get a little introspective and write some things down as we're going through this. And the goal here today is really to arm you with some of the key stats and key trends that we over here at MyCNA Jobs are seeing in the industry. And for those of you guys that don't know us that well, I know we work with some of you on the line, but in addition to our suite of caregiver and CNA recruitment tools, we are really mindful to study what's going on with the caregivers on an ongoing basis, and we do our best to bring you their perspective. What do they think about? What do they care about? And what's most important to them is they're evaluating a company or a job opportunity. And kind of how we break this down in our last study is we're looking at two populations. First, we surveyed over 1,500 caregivers across the nation. 81% are currently working. 68% of those had 2 years plus experience working as a caregiver. 91%, the lion's share of those were female. 61% had a CNA or an HHA certificate, and the rest indicated they were a caregiver companion. 22% also reported being a single parent. So second to that, we had a second study. There was over 1 million caregivers in our network in MyCNA Jobs. We talked to caregivers via a variety of channels to collect all kinds of information on pay data, so we get hyper-local trends as pay varies, as you guys know, so widely from market to market. So this is kind of the pool we're dealing with. So let's go ahead and kind of jump in and start to take a look. So over the last year, or probably more than that, the big thing everybody's talking about industry-wide is how there's a caregiver crisis and how there's a shortage of caregivers. And I think probably everybody on the line already knows there aren't enough caregivers. This is like, hey, P.S., this is old news. We know there's a shortage. You folks know there's a shortage, and we know there aren't enough new caregivers entering the field. We know recruiting is getting harder. This is one of those things. We have to stop talking about those things, and we got to start taking action on those things. So how do we start taking action? Well, it's time to compete. And that's the big theme for this. And, we've talked a lot here internally about how 2019 is really the year to get competitive. And as you kind of think about that competitive word takes a lot of different shapes. What are you doing as far as goals within your agency? What are you doing to offer caregivers the opportunity to come work for you, and why are they coming to work for you? And we're going to touch on some of the areas today and really start to hone in on what your goals are at an agency, depending on the stage, the lifestyle stage, if you will, of where your agency is at. So let's talk about competitive brand and how that's going to drive performance, because competitive agency brands need to drive that recruitment performance. And again, we analyzed thousands of companies, and we've kind of bucketed this into 5 classifications from the perspective of the caregiver. And that's what's a little different. We try and look at this from the caregiver lens to help executives determine where they fit and kind of predict where they might be headed. So we start here, in the whole theme of today's session is how we can be competitive. So before I kind of share what the caregivers want, we need to think about where you want to be, and that should drive you to kind of what you're going to take away in terms of next steps and how you want to continue to recruit and continue to bring those folks on board for the rest of 2018. Each of these categories should be approached and investing in kind of its own distinct separate way. And we're going to take a look at kind of what these 5 categories of agencies tend to look like. And as we walk through these, I would, I would imagine this will probably fit everybody on the line today. Said, yeah, that kind of looks like me, or yeah, that I kind of exhibit those traits. So as we go through some of these, kind of picture yourself at about where you're at and where your agency is at in that lifestyle stage. So let's start with the new folks. I know there are new folks on the phone here today. And sometimes that's a blessing and sometimes that's a curse. So we've determined these are clean slate folks. So you got a brand new agency that are probably unknown to most consumers in a lot of cases, and sometimes they're unknown to the caregivers too. So, you know, if you're new, I would say welcome aboard. This is great. Welcome. There's some good news and some bad news. The bad is, and I'm sure some of you guys experienced this, 19%, from what we found, 19% of caregivers aren't going to call you back, or quite frankly, maybe don't even take interest in your company because they simply haven't heard of you. So brand reputation is incredibly important. And the flip side of that coin is, the good news is that 81% are intrigued enough to learn more about the new person in town. What's new? What's the new offering? What is this new agency? So this is where you have, as it says there, you got one shot to really show what your competitive advantage is, because that honeymoon phase, as you see there, doesn't last all that long, and you will quickly join the ranks of these other classifications of agencies. So if you're new to the industry and you've got a new agency, it's really imperative that you make a really nice first impression. So your strategy to get competitive is all about building and establishing your new brand and making yourself known in that community any way you can. You have to be in front of those folks. Second classification, what we call weak brands. So this group is probably more well known than our new clean slate friends that are coming on board, but they struggle, sometimes immensely struggle, to recruit. The caregiver offerings, and what I'm talking about here is what you're offering the caregivers in terms of what the pay, what the benefits tend to fall in the bottom third of your local market. And that's something that's just not compelling for caregivers a lot of times. So a lot of times they're not calling you back, and a lot of times maybe they're not showing up for those interviews. And these brands are the ones that are unlikely to grow without a major investment in turning their image around, without a major image in recruiting, in retention, reevaluating what that pay and benefit package looks like. And we're going to talk about how to get the most bang for your buck here in a little bit. But it's like, how do you get competitive with this? It's really being introspective and saying, what is my pay? Is that competitive? What does it look like in terms of my recruitment strategy? And how am I retaining folks as well? Let's talk about the Defender brands now, which is our third classification. And these are folks that tend to be pretty well known in the community, and they tend to be pretty average in terms of what they offer to caregivers. Average pay, average benefits. And like most other agencies, they struggle to recruit, but they could be happy with the status quo, could be happy with the current business state. A lot of agencies fall into this category. Most of these, or a lot, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of these are family owned, they're well known, happy with where you're at, happy you're experiencing good growth, and you're happy with it. This is kind of the content group. So if you're happy with where you're at, the strategy for this is around maintaining that position. You don't want to go in decline. Oftentimes, if you want aggressive growth, this is where you need to look at making your offering to caregivers even stronger to tip that scale. So it's either, what are we doing here? Are we complacent and status quo? Is this something that maybe we're looking for an exit strategy or a succession planning if that's family-based, maybe the next generation is taking over? Or is this a position we're in now where we want to get into growth mode, and how do we do that? Next, we have what we call our Olympic brands. And as you might guess, these folks are kind of top tier. These are the folks that we want to model. They're the ones that offer most in terms of pay, most in terms of benefits. A lot of times they're being innovative in their offerings, innovative in their training, innovative in their onboarding. Oftentimes they're also in high growth mode. This is where caregivers want to work. This is where they desire to work. These companies need to maintain what they're doing to stay competitive, and they need to focus on staying a step ahead as a lot of those other agencies are nipping at their heels. And this is a very small segment. This is where there's not always a whole lot of room at the top, so there's not room for that many here. And if you fall into this, maintaining your position and keep doing what you're doing can be enough, but you still have to innovate to stay ahead of that crowd. Okay, so lastly, we have what we call our fading stars. So a lot of times these folks have been in business for a while and possibly used to be a market leader at one time. They're known, but unlike the Olympic brands that tend to innovate at a higher rate and are more aggressive with their offering to caregivers, these folks have fallen behind a little bit. So sometimes they're known not for the best of reasons. Sometimes they can even lack appeal to caregivers as you see there, kind of the competitive advantage sort of is fading. So this is a decision point where you need to ramp up the investment in recruiting and get competitive again to maintain the level of growth that these brands once had. So it's important here to reestablish what was once a renowned brand that maybe has fallen off a little bit. How can we ramp that back up to polish that image? So this is where I mentioned at the beginning, take out that pen and paper if you have it, and think about that. Where do you fall today? And again, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just being a little self-reflective. Think about where do you fall today, and think about where do you want to be. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of these, but at least you have to take an honest look and figure out where you're at, and then we can chart a course to where you want to be. So if you are mindful of these things, as you set up kind of the next 3 quarters of 2019, how do we chart a course that gets you to that next step? And that's kind of what we're going to take a look at now. So here's an interesting question. Are the caregivers sitting and waiting for your call? The answer is, of course not. They're not. The caregiver population is extremely busy. And I'm sure you've probably heard anecdotally this, but this is absolutely true. Caregivers on average, year in and year out, are getting 3 calls a week for work. This has been the same number that we've seen here over the past 2 years. The phone is ringing every day for them for a job opportunity, each and every day. This isn't just the caregivers that are looking for work. These are caregivers that are working for you today and caregivers that you're trying to recruit. So chances, I hate to be Debbie Downer, but while you're sitting on this webinar, chances are high that one of your top caregivers is getting a call and being courted and recruited by your competitor down the street. So be mindful of that. Be mindful of what the offering is. So this is what we found. 65% of caregivers told us this year they are always, and that should be in caps, they are always looking for a better job. And we'll dig into what quote unquote better looks like here in a couple slides. And 97% of caregivers are open to a job opportunity at any given time. Think about that for a minute. 97% any given time, that's almost 100% of caregivers are open to a new job. So this is incredibly different, guys, from really any other industry, and it's important to keep in mind both from a recruiter's point of view and the recruitment lens, and also what are we doing to retain these folks. There's little loyalty in this industry, gang, because quite honestly, there doesn't have to be. They can get a job anywhere right now. They're in such high demand. So of that, 32% of the caregivers interview every single month for another company. And again, I know there's a big group of us on the line today. I don't think this comes as a surprise, but I mean, that's a very high number. 32% of the caregivers saying they're looking for an interview with another company every single month. Think about that too. This means they're getting in the car, on a bus, on a train, with their resume in hand, walking into the office of one of your competitors just to kick the tires and see if there might be a better offering, better pay, better training, better shifts. Be mindful of that. You are constantly being evaluated on how competitive your offering is, not just to the other agencies in town, but to some other industries in town too. And we'll get to those other industries in just a minute. That's a very, very high number. So it's not just the recruiting, it's how are we retaining those folks. So let me let you in on a little secret here. 30% of caregivers are searching for jobs while at work. Let me say that again. 30% of caregivers are searching for jobs while they are at work. So they're not just on the clock. Their client's taking a nap. They're hunting to see what's out there. Who might be paying more? Who can help pay for my additional training or schooling or continuing education credits? Hey, who might have more in terms of benefits? Who has a case closer to my house? Who has the shifts and hours that I want? Even though these folks are working for you today, you are still being evaluated. I don't want to put too fine a point on that. They're looking all the time for their next opportunity. So do we really know how big your market is? We know what the demand is. Let's talk about your market. Do you really know how big it is? Do you know how many available caregivers reside within your specific service areas that you could potentially attract? It's important to know this because every market is so unique. I'm in Tampa, Florida, and that market is totally different than Des Moines, Iowa. Totally different. So if you want to start thinking about how your market needs to recruit, you need to know how your market looks. So let's take a look and see what that means. So let's say you put a job out there and you only have part-time opportunities. Well, according to us, 35% of caregivers told us that they want full-time only. So that means if you've got around your office, if you got 1,000 caregivers to work in your area, only 650 want to work part-time. So you just shrank the pool. So we have to be very mindful of not shrinking the pool and having this more broad to attract more caregivers. Okay? So next we asked, what type of companies do the caregivers want to work for? And here's what they said. So we already know, we established up front, and we know this, there aren't enough caregivers. They don't all want the hours we offer, and only 22% truly want to work for an agency. So you can see how the pool of caregivers keeps getting smaller. So it means you have to work harder to catch the attention of those caregivers, because odds are they might want to work someplace else. And we have to work on telling your story of why they should work for your agency. And we'll get there. By the end of this deck, we'll have a good story. I'll talk about how we at MyCNA Jobs can help you do this too. And if you require past agency experience, I've looked this year at how you can hire caregivers that might not have that experience, and it might be an opportunity to bring them on and to train them. So as we talk about what that caregiver pool looks like, it's pretty broad. Here's some other things we learned. Think about this. 72% of caregivers have worked in retail, and 63% have worked in fast food. So it's not just looking at that competitive landscape about the agency down the street. It's not just the hospital or assisted living. It's retail. It's fast food. And 80% of caregivers say they prefer to work for one company if they can get the hours they want. And oftentimes, it's easier for them to get the hours they want and the location that they want, and sometimes often the pay that they want, by working in retail and fast food. So we need to broaden our horizons and realize it's not just others in our industry that we're competing with. And sometimes that can be a little bit scary. Again, this comes back to what I mentioned earlier. 19% won't call a recruiter back if they've never heard of the company before. And I'm on the phone all the time working with local agencies, and they tell me this often, say, look, I've reached out to people. I've reached out to people that I thought would be a perfect fit, and they don't call me back. Well, a lot of that might have to do with what's the company reputation, and have they heard of you before? So it's not just having your name out there, it's having a good name and a good reputation. And I would really focus on this the rest of 2019. How do you get a good name out there in the marketplace and make your agency someplace desirable for that caregiver to work at? Okay, so let's take a look. Do you know kind of the care homes that are you attracting the caregivers from nursing homes, hospitals, senior living? If not, do you think maybe you could? Why should they want to work for you? Do you know how to sell someone working retail that has maybe a heart and has a big heart for senior care, or how to come work for you? Do you have training in place to bring these people on that maybe haven't had the training in the past? And think about, if you're only offering part-time hours, maybe can we have more full-time? We need to tap into that talent pool and broaden that rather than make it too narrow. If we're recruiting for narrow, it's like if we're recruiting part-time caregivers that can work in a house with a dog and a cat and speak Mandarin Chinese, it's incredibly difficult to recruit for that. We need to broaden our marketing efforts to get a volume of caregivers in to staff those cases. Okay, so again, are we making that market smaller? We need to open up the pool and open up 2019. It's not about excluding caregivers this year, but we want to include as many as we can. Don't make your market smaller than it has to be, because that's setting you up to not be competitive and, quite honestly, not setting you up to win. So let's talk about, we want to make sure we're not eliminating good people. Here's something that you might find interesting. 37% of caregivers report having less than a year experience. Did you know that? It's interesting because the corollary is that most agencies also require a year plus of experience. So experience is super important, no doubt, but sometimes knowledge is important too. Could you train someone perhaps with less experience to help get more caregivers through the door? Ask yourself the question. Here's another question. Here's another way to look at this. Everybody on the line today is sitting somewhere in the country with people passing by your office right now. Who's passing by that doesn't even know what a caregiver is? They don't even have a concept. Who's going to work at the mall? Who's going to work at McDonald's? Are these people that we could be missing? Possibly. If we're not hiring as many caregivers as you need today, could you grow your market by offering that opportunity to people rather than watching that market shrink? Okay, how can we assist this? So if we're looking to assist caregivers to get through your recruitment process, it's not just eliminating them. We want to open this, because if we're doing things the way we have been, we're not going to get enough caregivers. We already know there's a shortage. We need to meet your higher goals to be able to grow your business. So here's an example that I have up on the screen. 44% of caregivers report having an active CPR certificate, and a lot of agencies require that. So think about that for a minute. If you put this requirement in your job description today, you could stop someone from applying with you. Okay? If this is a hard requirement, you're eliminating part of that population. So if only 45% of caregivers report the company paid for the certificate, think about that. Is this an opportunity not only to stand out in your marketplace, but to pay for that, to bring people on board and hopefully have them retain with you? That's something that we can help with. We also want to make this easy for them. 62% of caregivers report their current or past employee paid for medical testing. Okay? If you fall into that 40% or so that don't pay for medical testing, could you? Is that an opportunity to maybe expand your offering? Again, we don't want to leave caregivers on the table. Training. 80% of caregivers, 80, would consider working for a company consider getting a CNA certificate if the company paid for it. Do you require a certificate? Okay, we all know that there aren't enough CNAs. We all want CNAs. So 80% of caregiver companions said they would get a CNA if the company paid for it. Hey, and I know it's not always easy. I know it costs money. I know it costs time. Think about how much it costs to turn a case away. Think about how much you're paying in overtime. Is it worth making an investment and perhaps getting those folks certified? Training, okay? This is something that we found really interesting in our study from memory loss last year, and these cases are definitely on the rise. So 83% of caregivers report working with memory loss patients, yet only 65% report having training to do so. So there's an opportunity to help train these caregivers to help them do their job better. So again, let's stop for a second and get those pens out. So are you eliminating good candidates because of too narrow and too strict requirements? Possibly. Are your requirements really requirements, or are they preferences? And that's something I would look hard and long at. Are there opportunities to train in-house? And are there some ways you can assist the caregiver versus eliminate them to attract more talent and open that up to more people coming through your door? Now let's flip gears a little bit, and this is where most people find it incredibly interesting, is finding out how competitive your pay is for your local market. And you'll see, pay isn't everything, but I think we'd all agree that pay is a major driver. And we have data from literally millions of caregivers at a zip code level on what they want to make this year. So let's take a look. This is national average. We ask caregivers what they would be willing to work for, self-reported from the caregiver. The average desired wage for a caregiver without a certification is $11.37. And the desired wage for a caregiver with a CNA/HHA with their certification is $12.11. Nationwide averages. I'll leave that up just for a second. But you probably want to know, how does my state stack up? Well, here it is. This is what we found at the state level. So I'll leave this up so you can kind of go through and find your state on there. How to kind of decode this. If the number's in green, that means it's above the national average, meaning caregivers in your state want more than the national average. Conversely, if the number is in red, that means it's below the national average and caregivers want less than the national average. So what's better than state data, what's better than national data, is caregivers want to know what they make in your specific city. So great news. We have a free pay report where we have that data. So you'll be able to enter what you pay for both non-certified caregiver companions and CNAs. You can enter your zip code and our system will send you back a report so you can take a look and see where you're at from a pay standpoint. You can see where it ranks locally. So it slices all that data and it just looks at your market. So I'm going to send out a link following today's webinar. So if you want to do that pay analysis, feel free. It's very, very eye-opening. So you can check that out after the webinar. So while we're on the topic of pay, we asked caregivers if they felt they can earn enough money to stay in the profession. What's scary is 24% of them said no. And to me, that's scary. That's incredibly alarming. So we already acknowledge that the market isn't big enough. We already know there aren't enough caregivers. We can't have almost a quarter of them leaving us. We need, as an industry, to find more ways to keep them working and working for us in the industry. And again, I mentioned before, it's not just the other agency down the road. It's not just the hospital. It's not just the senior living community. Others are encroaching in our industry and poaching these folks away from us, okay? 10% of caregivers say they have interviewed or worked for Amazon in the past. That is a massive, massive number. And Amazon, if you haven't felt that impact yet, I assure you, you will. So if you don't have that Amazon warehouse or that Amazon in your marketplace, as I have up here, know Goliath is coming. And they're coming for your caregivers. And we've got to get competitive. Think about this. Amazon has regular single-day hiring events where they will hire 50,000 workers in a single day. Traditionally, they pay 30% higher than retail, and they are opening stores all across the country. And as of right now, they operate about 214 centers around the US. So if that's not eye-opening, I don't know what is. Very, very scary, because those are the pools of people we are going after. Same with Target. For those of you guys like doing their Target runs, and I'm one of them, they are raising the minimum wage across the country. And you are going to be hearing more and more and more about the minimum wage going up and up, both at Target, retail, fast food. These companies, the Targets of the world, the Amazons, the fast food, that's going to shape how you recruit. So a lot of times we get myopic and think it's just the other agencies we have to think about or we have to worry about, and it's not. So if there's kind of one big overarching takeaway from the webinar today, you need to start thinking differently about the competitive landscape, who the competitors are, how we need to approach this competitive landscape and blunt against them. So how do we start doing that? First of all, not only pay, are your benefits competitive? This is one thing that we can really help to shape. And one of my favorite parts in going through this session, we call it the battle of the benefits. So we're going to put two benefits side by side, and we asked caregivers which one they would pick. I think some of these are incredibly eye-opening. So let's take a look at this. So is it earning a higher wage or having health insurance? I know everybody's muted right now. We'll play the home version. Write down what you think. So let's see, battle of the benefits. Is it more important that the caregivers earn a higher wage or health insurance? This one's probably no surprise. 63% say they would much rather earn a higher wage than have health insurance. Some of these are not as cut and dry, though, as you'll see. Next one, health insurance or paid vacation time. This one, health insurance. And maybe that one's not as surprising either. So majority of folks would rather have health insurance as opposed to paid vacation time. Next one, paid sick time or paid training. This one, much closer, almost even. So the caregivers are ranking paid training almost on par with paid sick time. That one usually surprises people. So think about that. Just a little bit ahead is paid sick time, but that's how important caregivers view paid training. Take a look at the next one. Is it more important that they earn a higher wage or more important that they have those preferred shifts or preferred hours? And again, probably no surprise here. They would rather earn the higher wage. Okay, let's take a look here. Would they rather have a 401k or paid vacation time? Which one is more important to them? This one might be eye-opening. So 68% say they would rather have a 401k as opposed to having paid vacation time. So that one's pretty interesting. This one, a lot of folks might think of this, not think of this as a benefit, but caregivers do look at this. So do you offer, would they rather have direct deposit or get paid out weekly? Here, 60-40. 60% of the folks said they would rather have that direct deposit than be paid out on a weekly basis. So maybe you had a little bit of fun with that, and hopefully you learned a few things there. So as you look at this, how competitive are your benefits? Take a look at those things that we just went through. Where could you be more competitive? Could you be more competitive? Are you focusing on where you can make the biggest impact? And that's what I would advise. Here are some things. This next section are things that are really in our control in terms of how efficiently are we processing the candidates once they come to us. Are we more effective than the competition? And again, the competition isn't just that agency down the street. So this is kind of the last item we're going to take a look at. We've looked at the market, we looked at the pay and the benefits. Now let's see, can we move caregivers through the process more efficiently? And how does that stack up against the competitive landscape? Okay, so we asked caregivers, how long will you wait? How long will that caregiver wait after an interview before interviewing with another company? Look at that. 27% said they won't wait, and another 27% said they'll wait up to 3 days. So they're not in the business of waiting for that job offer. They're going after the opportunity that strikes the soonest and is most appealing and most interesting to them. If your job, for whatever reason, isn't the most interesting, whether that's pay, whether that's overall comp, whether that's benefits, we have to get better at processing them than those next to us in that competitive landscape. The folks just don't wait. So the corollary to this is we asked caregivers kind of the same question, but phrased it a little bit differently. So on average, how long does it take you after your interview to start working your first shift? So you can see 1 in 5, 20% start within 24 hours, and the next tier, 32% start within 3 days. So it's more than half. More than half of caregivers are getting to work within 3 days. So as you evaluate your process, if yours is longer than this, you're going to have to work even harder to get those caregivers to come work for you. So some of these things are in our control. How can we get better? How can you get better at processing these folks, knowing they're getting multiple calls for jobs, knowing that they're taking interviews immediately after the interview they just had, knowing they can get to work, half of them go to work within 3 days, okay? So this is kind of segueing right into this next insight that 24% of companies do a poor job of letting the caregiver know what the next step in the hiring process is. This is entirely in your control. So that means there are a lot of caregivers that are leaving your office confused and not having an idea of what the next step in the process is. We can change that. That's something that's in your control process-wise. So bring out that pen again. So we start going through. Do you start the processing of caregivers the second they leave the interview? I would advocate you should. If not, could you do that? Can you shave any time off your current processing time? Is there anything you can do there? Knowing that half of those folks are getting to work within 3 days. So if you're longer than that 3-day window, you could be leaving some good people on the table. Also, do you have a good communication plan in place to keep caregivers engaged while you're processing? Hugely important, okay? Are you rolling out the red carpet to stand out in an incredibly competitive marketplace? Part of this this competitive landscape and part of standing out is creating a positive experience for the caregivers, rolling out the red carpet and doing it better than the competition is doing it better than the agency down the street, doing it better than Target, doing it better than Amazon, to make it a place that's desirable, that they want to work at. And it starts with the interview. So if a caregiver feels in italics, the interview is too short or too long, 14%, they won't be interested in joining your company. So it starts with the interview. So what does that look like? What does that feel like? Nobody likes feeling like their time isn't valuable. So, and again, this is something that we work with thousands of agencies across the country. And we have a lot of folks that have a 15-minute interview schedule. We have some that have 5-hour blocks. I'm not kidding. That's the truth. 5-hour blocks. The problem is caregivers don't know what to expect unless we're telling them. So we ask caregivers how long their interviews are on average, and this is what they told us. So 30% said that it's less than 30 minutes, half said it's 30 to 45, 13% said it's an hour, and 5% said it's longer than an hour. So it comes back to this feeling important. Can you really make a caregiver feel valued in 15 minutes? Think about that when you're considering what your interview process is on site. There's definitely a balance between long enough to make that caregiver feel important, but too short to where they feel underutilized. So that sweet spot probably is in that 30 to 45 minute range where you're feeling like you're getting to know them and they're feeling valued at the same time. So how many people do they interview with? This is what we asked them next. How many people they typically interview with, and this is what they said. 47% interview with one person, 46% interview with 2 people, 7% interview with 3 or more people. We thought this was really interesting. 87% of caregivers would be more interested in working for you if you had a chance to meet and interact with your existing team. Now, this is something that maybe isn't that hard to do. How can you have some of their potential coworkers and peers be part of this interviewing process, part of a meet and greet process? How can we do that? Let's talk about commute times for a little bit. And this is something else we asked our caregivers about in our study. So how far are they willing to go for an interview? And here's what they said. Certain percentage, 37%, you're going to go 20 to 30 minutes. 30% are going to go 15 to 20 minutes. 17% are going to go 30 to 45 minutes. 10% will go more than an hour, and 6% less than 15 minutes. Most caregivers really aren't willing to spend more than half an hour getting someplace. Why would they? They don't need to. There are other companies hiring literally right down the street. So we can take a look at a strategy in a second, but it's something to consider when you're thinking about how you can be more competitive to stand out from the competition. So part of this standing out is making the caregiver feel comfortable at your office. 28% of caregivers, and that's a pretty big number. The most important factor in interviewing with an employer is they feel comfortable. That's it. Make them feel comfortable while they're there. What's interesting is only 37% say that they're asked if they'd like anything to drink. Offering them a glass of water, offering them a cup of coffee. These are things we can do in our internal process to make that caregiver feel more comfortable. A lot of the time, it's just making them feel welcomed and like they would be a valuable member of your team. When we ask caregivers, what's a good experience? What does a good experience look like? Here's what they said. The interviewer, quote, the interviewer offered to pick me up a cup of coffee from Dunkin' Donuts because I had a long drive to the interview. I got to go on a company tour of the entire facility and meet people. I just went on an interview and felt like I belonged there because they made me feel comfortable, like I was at home. The interviewer made a personal connection and related to my situation as an unemployed person fresh out of college to her daughter in the same situation. So all of these are real examples that a caregiver could walk out of that interaction wanting to work for you rather than a competitor. It comes down to just being nice sometimes and just making them feel welcomed. So are we setting proper expectations prior to an interview to let a caregiver know how long they're going to be there? Again, that 30 to 45 minutes seems to be the sweet spot. Do you make caregivers feel welcome? And are your interviews in depth enough to make them feel important and to make them feel valued? Can you make this experience better than your competitors? And if so, how? If you're struggling to recruit in certain parts of your territory, can you move interview locations? There's a strategy around that. Okay, let's take a look at kind of maybe some not so great news. So the not so great or the bad news is the caregiver recruitment is getting more challenging. More bad news is the average cost to recruit a caregiver is up 63% over the last 2 years. And I know that's bad news, but you also need marketing channels and different marketing channels to hit your recruitment goals. So let's talk a little bit about industry average cost per hire. So here's some good news. And this is from our friends at Home Care Pulse. These are not My CNA Jobs numbers. These are Home Care Pulse numbers. So they just came out with their new benchmarking study, and I feel like I'm bragging a little bit, but this is their number, not ours. My CNA Jobs ranked the lowest. Lowest cost to recruit caregivers alongside the 4 largest channels in home care. So you can see the chart. The cost to recruit in 2015 is on the left, and the cost to recruit in 2018, which are the most recent figures, on the right. Okay, this metric takes into account the sourcing costs. So what you'd pay someone like us, like Indeed, like Craigslist, as well as all the processing fees, the background checks, the drug screening, fully loaded. So as you can see here, My CNA Jobs is the lowest across the board. And a big reason and a big driver of this is we just don't buy caregiver resumes or scrape from other sources. This is unique to us. When you're working with us, all of those caregivers have come to our site voluntarily and filled out their profile and are looking for their next great job opportunity. Okay? Do you need more hiring tools in your kit as 2019 progresses? So it's kind of my 2-minute sales pitch here on My CNA Jobs. We have some cool new tools that are available. So even if you're a current customer, we probably have something new for you. And the tools really are designed to help you tell your story this year better than any other, to build that competitiveness in your neck of the woods. Something unique about us is that we can help you reach caregivers that are not applying for your job. Each and every day, we get thousands and thousands of people visiting us to get access to our free training, our free continuing education credits online, to research schools. We have partnerships with over 3,000 schools in the country, including a partnership with the American Red Cross. And they're coming to us looking to apply for a scholarship. We have the largest scholarship program in the industry. We have so much access to a lot of caregivers in your local market that you may not today. Again, people not applying for your jobs through us or through other channels, we can reach. How do we do that? We have what we call our interview booking tool. So this service, we can deliver people right to your door, and this is what we really pride ourselves on doing. We can book the caregivers that you're probably not reaching today and supplement what you're already doing with your other recruiting channels. It's working in tandem and alongside with what you're already doing. If you like one of those other sources, please keep using them. It's not My CNA Jobs' job to take you away from something that you feel like is working. What's cool about this too is there's no contract for the interview booking. It really is pay as you go, and it's easy to get started. We'd work with you, and a member of my team would work with you guys to go through. We'll do a light pre-screen and figure out what the parameters are. Then we get that to our recruiting team, and they do a light pre-screen on the phone with those candidates. We figure out who's the best fit. We book them for an interview. You get an email alert to log in and view them in your portal that looks like what I have up on the screen. And it's pretty fast. Typically, we can start getting you interviews within 1 to 2 days of launching this program. And nationally, about 1 in 3 candidates we book gets hired. So this is nice. Whether you need a few more hires this month, or if that's something you need ongoing, this program would be really, really great for you. And it's nice that we can partner with your existing efforts that are already in place and supplement and augment them. What else is kind of cool, on the back end, you get a report card, if you will, so you can see how caregivers are rating you. And this is something we call our Caregiver Insight Engine. So you can get a real-time snapshot and a real-time pulse on if a caregiver is interested in you or not interested. Are they not interested because of pay, because of benefits, because of territory, or maybe it's something else? So this is data that we bundle up, give it to you, so we can optimize your interview booking service, but also we can be your partner so you're testing these various recruitment strategies that you're wanting to test this year. So if you want to test the impact of a new sign-on bonus, we can tell you if that's working. If you want to test raising wages, 50 cents, 75 cents, we can tell you how many more caregivers are interested. Interview booking is a really interesting tool that's opening a new channel of caregivers that, if you're working with us, aren't necessarily part of that population you're working with already. And this is something to help make you more competitive in the marketplace. So think back to where your agency is and what that strategy is at. So whether you're already trending to be an Olympian or whether you're trending as a fading star, this is something we can help you get more competitive with. So that brings us to the conclusion of the webinar today. I really appreciate everybody's time. We do have a few minutes before the top of the hour for questions. I will be sending out an email after this that's going to have that paid data report. If you're not currently using My CNA Jobs but would like to, the contact info is up on the screen. We're happy to have a conversation. Folks on my team would love to talk with you and see how we can help. The thing is, I really think it's important to be mindful of what that competitive landscape is like. Again, big takeaway, not just from the agencies down the road from you, but fast food, retail, the Targets of the world, the Amazons of the world. Be mindful of that. So I can go ahead and I can unmute everybody's line. I would be happy to answer any questions you folks might have. Bear with me just a second. And everybody's line should be unmuted now, and I'm happy to answer anything you might have. Or if it was just that thorough, which is fine as well, you'll be expecting to get my email very, very shortly. But again, I can hang out for a couple minutes if there are any questions. Nick, I guess it was just that thorough.
I guess so.
Hi. Hi, this is Georgia with Soaring Independent Cooperative. I just wanted to say thank you for that information. It was very helpful, and I will be checking out the My CNA Jobs website here soon.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for the feedback. What's really interesting is you can see on our site, if you can check out what the competitive landscape looks like. So when you go to My CNA Jobs the first time, if you enter your zip code on the site, you can see what caregivers see. So you'll see all of the job postings and all the companies we're working with in your local market. So you can get a feel for what, again, that competitive landscape looks like and see what other home care agencies are represented, what senior living is represented, and get a feel for maybe what their rates are and what their benefit packages are.
Okay, awesome. And then when we talked about the comp packages, and is there any, especially I'm in the startup or the clean state phase,
Okay.
And so would there be, when you speak with a representative with your company, do they kind of help you get an idea based on your market, how to build that brand awareness? Okay.
100%. I worked with a gentleman in Stamford, Connecticut about 2 months ago, and he was such clean slate, brand new. He had just purchased his franchise, was just opening his doors. He hadn't hired a caregiver yet, which meant he couldn't staff a case yet. So it was like that chicken and the egg. It's like, I want the cases, but I don't have a caregiver, and I want a caregiver, but I don't have a case to send them on. So we worked with him and got him on that interview booking program. And again, my caveat here is results will vary by market, and results will vary by benefit offering. But we set that up on a Friday afternoon after 5 o'clock Eastern, and by the following Wednesday, that gentleman had already conducted 17 interviews and was proceeding with 5 candidates.
Awesome.
So, and again, a caveat is results may vary, but we do that day in and day out. And so as you're looking to get off the ground, that could be a really interesting way to do that, because I know how it is. My previous life, I worked for a franchisor, a big multinational franchise company for more than 20 years. And I know when I would help new franchisees come on board, time is of the essence. And you know that you need to interview the caregivers. You know you need to get people on board, but sometimes there aren't enough hours in the day. And that's something that my team can certainly help with. Great question. Any others? Going once, going twice. Well, with that, I think we've had a very productive hour. Thank you again for allowing me to come and speak to you folks. Be on the lookout for an email from me later on this afternoon. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to visit My CNA Jobs. I love to connect and help out any way I can.
Great. Thank you, Bobby. We're always talking about recruitment and retention, and to get some real actionable data, I think it is great. So appreciate it.
My pleasure. I hope you found that insightful.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.